The company's annual gala, luxury hotel, crystal chandeliers. While others toast to power and greed, Mark stands alone. He is a single dad in a faded suit, checking his phone with an aching heart. His young daughter is home, waiting for a bedtime story he promised not to miss. No ambition, the sharks in silk ties whisper, mocking his early exits and quiet nature. But the cold, iron-willed CEO has been watching him from the shadows of the ballroom. She approaches, signals him to follow into a deserted hallway, and whispers a truth so dangerous it shatters the room's silence. Everything is about to change. Mark was a man of quiet habits and visible exhaustion. At 38, his life was no longer about his own dreams, but about the bright, curious eyes of his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. Since the divorce, he had become a master of the invisible tightrope, balancing a demanding corporate job with the relentless reality of being a solo parent. He was a mid-level analyst, the kind of employee who did the heavy lifting while others took the credit. In the fast-paced world of Zenith Holdings, Mark was often viewed as a relic. He didn't stay for strategic drinks after 7 p.m. He didn't join the weekend golf trips. He left at exactly 5:01 p.m. every day to pick up Lily from after-school care. To the young, hungry associates, this made him look unambitious. To the upper management, he was simply someone who got the job done, but was never considered for leadership. Every morning began at 5:30 a.m. He would prepare Lily's lunchbox, iron her school uniform, and braid her hair while mentally reviewing complex financial spreadsheets. By the time he sat at his desk, he had already finished a full day's work of parenting. He often sat in his car for 5 minutes before entering the building, just to find the strength to switch from dad to data analyst. Yet in the eyes of his peers, he was just the guy who looked a little too tired and left a little too early. During the weekly board meetings, Mark's detailed reports were often glossed over. He noticed discrepancies, small, flickering red flags in the numbers of the company's flagship, Project Phoenix. It started with a misaligned decimal point in the offshore accounts, then grew into a massive gap in the projected quarterly revenue. But whenever he tried to speak up, his manager, a slick man named Julian, would cut him off with a condescending smile. "Stick to the data entry, Mark. We've got the strategy covered. Why don't you worry more about getting your timesheets in on time instead of overanalyzing world-class projections?" Julian would say, his voice dripping with faux concern. Julian was everything Mark wasn't: loud, flashy, and obsessed with the appearance of success. He wore watches that cost more than Mark's car and spent more time networking than auditing. He was a master of optics over substance. The CEO, Eleanor Vance, was a legend of steel. She was known for her ice-cold efficiency and a complete lack of sentimentality. She rarely interacted with mid-level staff, moving through the office like a ghost in a designer suit. She was the person everyone feared, yet everyone wanted to impress. No one realized that Eleanor spent her nights in her penthouse, reading the raw data reports, the ones Mark spent hours perfecting. She was the only one who noticed the footnotes, the tiny italicized warnings that warned of impending structural failure. She noticed the silent bravery of a man who refused to fudge a single number, even when his job security was on the line. The annual party was a mandatory nightmare for Mark. He stood near the buffet, feeling the weight of the old suit he hadn't worn in 3 years. He felt like an imposter among the silk ties and diamond earrings. While others discussed their plans for skiing in the Alps or buying property in the Hamptons, Mark was thinking about whether Lily's fever had broken and if the babysitter had remembered her favorite bedtime story about the brave little engine that never gave up. Julian, his glass filled with expensive scotch, wandered over with a group of sycophants. "Still here, Mark. I figured you'd be home tucking in the kid by now. You know, that's why you're still in that cubicle. You've got to show leadership presence. You can't lead a team if you're always worried about a bedtime story. Leadership requires sacrifice, Mark, something you clearly don't understand. You're playing checkers while we're playing chess." The circle of colleagues chuckled, their eyes mocking his scuffed shoes and the faint smell of baby shampoo that always lingered around him. Mark didn't snap back. He didn't have the energy for ego games. He just offered a weary, polite smile. My daughter is my priority, Julian. The work is always finished on time. Accuracy doesn't require a tuxedo or a 10 p.m. drink. It requires focus. Finished is not the same as winning, Julian countered, turning his back to Mark to toast his brilliant success with Project Phoenix. From across the ballroom, Eleanor Vance watched the interaction. She didn't see a weak father. She saw a man of immense structural integrity being bullied by a man made of cardboard and charisma. She saw a man who didn't play the game because he was too busy being the foundation of it. The music shifted to a dramatic, sweeping orchestral piece, a crescendo that signaled the height of the gala. Eleanor didn't wait for her scheduled speech. She moved through the crowd, her presence parting the guests like a blade. She reached Mark. The room went silent as the most powerful woman in the building touched the arm of the quiet guy from accounting. Walk with me, she said. It wasn't a request. It was a command that stopped the hearts of everyone watching, especially Julian, who suddenly felt a cold sweat on the back of his neck. As they stepped into the long, dimly lit service corridor, the muffled sounds of the party became a rhythmic heartbeat. Mark's pulse raced. His mind went through 1,000 scenarios. Was he being fired? Was there a mistake in the Lily-related leave he took last week? He was certain this was it, the polite way to remove the man who didn't fit the culture. They stopped under a flickering yellow light that cast long, sharp shadows on the floor. Eleanor turned to him, her eyes searching his with an intensity that made his skin crawl. She leaned in, her perfume mixing with the sterile scent of the hallway. Her voice was a sharp, chilling whisper that changed the trajectory of his life forever. I found the hidden ledger for Project Phoenix, and I know you're the only one in this entire building who didn't sign off on the lie. Mark felt the air leave his lungs. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He had suspected it, the creative accounting behind Project Phoenix, but he didn't realize it had gone all the way to a hidden ledger. He had noticed the shadows, the tiny anomalies that didn't add up, but Eleanor had found the source of the darkness. Many of your superiors, including Julian, have signed off on the inflated projections, Eleanor continued, her voice cold and precise. They are gambling with the company's future to secure their own year-end bonuses. They thought they could bury your warnings in the system by deleting your entries and marking your reports as incomplete. They were wrong. I recovered the deleted logs 3 nights ago. I saw your name on every rejected warning. She stepped back, watching him intently. The power dynamic in the hallway shifted. She wasn't looking at a mid-level analyst anymore. She was looking at a witness to a corporate crime. If I give you the authority to halt this project tomorrow, knowing it will make you the most hated man in this building, if you know your career might be over if we fail to prove the fraud in front of the board, what would you do? Will you stay silent to protect your paycheck? Or will you speak to protect the thousands of people who work for this firm? Mark looked at the floor, then back at Eleanor. He thought about the small 2-bedroom apartment he shared with Lily. He thought about the overdue electric bill on the kitchen counter. Then he thought about the values he taught her every night: honesty, courage, and the weight of one's word. He thought about the man he wanted Lily to see when she looked at him in 10 years. I've already been invisible for 5 years, Miss Vance, Mark said, his voice gaining a sudden, hard edge that even surprised himself. I'd rather be hated for being right than rewarded for being a coward. If the project is built on a lie, it will collapse eventually, and thousands of families will suffer when the stocks tank. I won't let my daughter grow up seeing her father as a man who traded his integrity for a quiet life. If you want the truth, I have the evidence they couldn't find, because they were too arrogant to think I'd keep copies. Eleanor nodded, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, the first time anyone had seen her look truly satisfied. The others chose silence to keep their chairs. You chose the truth to keep your soul. That is the only kind of leadership I care about. But we must be smart. Julian is a cornered rat, and he will bite. He will try to make this about your unreliability and your distractions at home. She told him that a trap had been set. She needed him to be the bait. She needed the board to see the fraud in real time. He was to return to the party and say nothing. He was to endure the sneers of Julian and the others for one more night. It was the calm before the storm. Returning to the ballroom was the hardest thing Mark had ever done. The lights felt too bright, the music too loud, and the smell of expensive champagne made him nauseous. He saw Julian holding court, bragging about the unprecedented growth Project Phoenix would bring. Julian even raised a glass toward Mark, a mocking gesture of victory. Mark simply nodded, his face a mask of stone, and turned away. He felt a new kind of pressure, the weight of a secret that could destroy a multi-million-dollar empire. He realized he had just stepped into a war zone. "How's it going, Mark?" from a colleague felt like a coded interrogation. He kept his head down, finished his glass of water, and left the gala an hour early. As he drove home, the city lights blurred through the windshield. He wasn't just a single dad anymore. He was a silent guardian of the company's integrity. He was a man with a target on his back. When he arrived home, the babysitter was asleep on the couch. He paid her, then went to Lily's room. She was fast asleep, clutching her teddy bear, her breathing soft and rhythmic. Mark sat on the edge of her bed and touched her hair. "Daddy's going to make you proud tomorrow, Lily," he whispered. "Even if everything changes, we'll still have our truth." He didn't sleep that night. He spent the hours before dawn triple-checking his personal encrypted drive, ensuring every timestamp and every forged signature was ready for the morning. He watched the sun rise, feeling a strange sense of peace. The truth was no longer a burden, it was a weapon. 3 days later, the emergency summit was called in the executive boardroom on the 50th floor. The air was thick with confusion and irritation. Julian and the other senior managers sat at the long mahogany table, checking their expensive watches, clearly annoyed by the interruption to their pre-launch celebrations. "What is this about, Eleanor?" Julian asked, leaning back with an air of unearned confidence. "We have the Phoenix launch in 48 hours. The investors are already popping champagne. We don't have time for a process review. Every minute we sit here is a minute we lose in market momentum." Eleanor stood at the head of the table, her face a mask of granite. "We have a problem with the projections. One analyst has raised a significant concern regarding the structural integrity of the project's funding and the offshore tax liabilities. It seems there is a shadow ledger that contradicts our public filings." A wave of derisive laughter rippled through the room. "A shadow ledger?" Julian scoffed, looking around at his cronies. "Who came up with this fantasy? Some junior kid who can't handle a basic calculator? Or maybe someone who's been spending too much time at daycare and not enough time in the market?" "Mark," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the laughter like a cold blade. "Mark Ward." The laughter died instantly, replaced by a tense, uncomfortable silence. Julian's face flushed a deep, angry red. "Mark? The guy who leaves at 5 to pick up his kid?" "Eleanor, this is ridiculous. He's a bean counter who barely knows his way around a boardroom. He doesn't understand the big picture. He's probably just bitter because I gave him a mediocre performance review for his lack of dedication. He's trying to drag us down to his level of mediocrity." Twist 1, the specifics. Eleanor didn't argue. She simply looked at Mark, who was sitting at the far end of the table, looking unusually calm. "Mr. Ward, the floor is yours. Show us what Julian thinks you don't understand." Mark stood up. His hands didn't shake. He didn't look at Julian's sneer. He looked at the data. He opened his laptop and projected a series of encrypted files onto the massive 100-inch screen. "The big picture you're referring to, Julian, is a $30 million hole in the escrow account. You've been using future projections as current assets, and you've been funneling the difference into a shell company called Phoenix Rising, based in the Cayman Islands. It's not strategy. It's a Ponzi scheme built on the backs of our employees' pensions." The room erupted. Julian jumped to his feet, slamming his fist on the table so hard his glass of water rattled. "He's lying. He's trying to sabotage the company because he's a failure who wants to justify his own laziness. Security, get this man out of here. He's compromised and clearly mentally unstable." Twist 2, the digital fingerprint. "Sit down, Julian." Eleanor's voice was like a whip that silenced the entire floor. I've had the IT department audit the system logs. Every time Mark submitted a warning report over the last 6 months, it was manually deleted from my dashboard using your credentials. You didn't realize that the system saves a ghost copy of every deletion on the secure server I maintain. I've seen the timestamps. I've seen the IP addresses. They all lead back to your office. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The other managers, men who had mocked Mark in the hallways, began to look at their hands, realizing the ship was sinking. They realized their own digital signatures were on those documents too. They had traded their ethics for a corner office, and now the walls were closing in. Mark didn't stop. He produced the original documents, the ones he had quietly saved to an offline server every time they were edited or corrected by Julian. He showed the discrepancies, the forged signatures of the CFO, and the true devastating numbers that showed Project Phoenix was a hollow shell. He spoke for 40 minutes, his voice steady, his logic undeniable. One by one, the managers who had mocked him began to pale. They realized that the unambitious single dad had been documenting their every move for half a year. He wasn't slow, he was thorough. He wasn't lacking ambition, he was building an airtight cage for them. He hadn't been leaving early because he was lazy. He had been leaving because he had a life worth living, which gave him the clarity to see their lives for what they were. "Ms. Vance," Mark said, closing his laptop, "the data is there. The choices made by this management team have put 5,000 jobs at risk just so they could hit their quarterly targets and buy new yachts. I'm finished. I have nothing more to say to these people." Eleanor looked around the room. The power had shifted completely. The men in expensive suits were suddenly small, desperate, and sweating. The man in the old oversized suit was the only one standing tall. "Julian, you are fired, effective immediately," Eleanor announced. "The legal team and the federal investigators are waiting in your office. As for the rest of you who signed these ledgers, we will be having individual meetings this afternoon with our ethics committee. I suggest you start thinking about the truth, if you still remember what it looks like." The meeting was adjourned. As the disgraced executives scrambled out, trying to call their lawyers with trembling hands, Mark didn't gloat. He didn't say, "I told you so." He simply packed his laptop into his worn leather bag. "Wait, Mark," one of the younger associates whispered, looking at him with newfound terror and respect. You're going to be the new VP, aren't you? You just destroyed the entire upper floor single-handedly." Mark looked at his watch. It was 4:45 p.m. "I don't know about that," Mark replied calmly, "but I do know I have to get to the school. My daughter has a violin recital tonight, and I promised her I wouldn't be late. Some things are more important than titles, and I've already spent too much time in this room." That sentence, more than the data, made everyone in the room lower their heads. They finally understood what real priority and real power looked like. It wasn't about the office you held, it was about the promises you kept. The following week, the company was in shock, but it was a healthy shock. The rot had been excised, but the wound was deep. Eleanor Vance didn't just promote Mark. She created a new position, Chief of Ethics and Risk Oversight. It was a role that sat directly under the CEO, with the power to veto any project that didn't meet the Mark standard of integrity. Mark sat in his new office. It was larger, yes, but he kept the same worn metal toolbox Lily had given him on his desk. He was nervous. The responsibility was immense. He was no longer just a man with data. He was the guardian of the company's soul. He felt the weight of every employee's future on his shoulders. "You're worried about the time," Eleanor said, stepping into his office without knocking, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She had traded her usual icy demeanor for a look of genuine partnership. "I won't sacrifice my time with Lily, Eleanor. I can't be the man this company needs if I'm not the father she needs. I told the board that I will still be leaving at 5. If that doesn't work, I'll go back to my cubicle." Eleanor nodded, sitting across from him. "The board has approved a flexible schedule for your entire department. We're moving to a results-based culture, not a seat-time culture. You showed us that the man who leaves at 5 might be the only one actually watching the store while everyone else is busy looking busy. We need more fathers and mothers in leadership, Mark. People who have something to go home to usually make better decisions for the future." The company culture began to heal. The culture of fear and performative busyness was replaced by a culture of integrity. The associates who used to stay late just to be seen by the boss started going home to their families. Productivity actually increased because the work was no longer about hiding mistakes, but about fixing them. Mark became a mentor to the younger staff, teaching them that precision and ethics were the true markers of a professional. Mark handled his new power with the same quiet grace. He didn't seek revenge on those who had laughed at him. He simply held everyone to the same high standard. He became the moral anchor of Zenith Holdings. He was a man who led by example, not by decree. At home, life changed too. The crushing weight of financial stress began to lift. He could afford the better soccer camps for Lily and a car that didn't make a strange clanking noise. But more importantly, he was present. He wasn't distracted by the fear of being fired or the guilt of being ignored. He felt like he was finally living the life he had promised himself years ago. One morning, they sat at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming in. Lily was eating her cereal, looking at her dad with wide, curious eyes. "You don't look sad anymore, Daddy. Is the boss lady nice now? Did you find the missing numbers? You look like a superhero." Mark smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "The boss lady and I had a very important talk, Lily. She reminded me that being a good dad is the best job I'll ever have. And yes, the numbers are exactly where they should be now. Being a superhero just means telling the truth, even when it's scary." Project Phoenix was redesigned from scratch. It took longer, and it was less flashy for the marketing brochures, but it was solid, it was honest. And when it finally launched a year later, it was a massive, sustainable success that won the company international awards for corporate social responsibility. Eleanor Vance publicly credited Mark for saving the company from a catastrophe that would have ended in bankruptcy. The whisper in the hallway hadn't just changed Mark's life. It had saved the future of every employee in the building. It had proven that silence isn't always peace. Sometimes silence is just a countdown to disaster. And sometimes the most important person in the room is the one everyone else ignored. A year passed. The annual party arrived once again. It was held in the same hotel, under the same crystal chandeliers. But the atmosphere was unrecognizable. The music was softer, the laughter more genuine. There were no power circles or whispered gossip about who was being fired. Just people who respected each other. Mark didn't stand in the corner this time. He moved through the room, shaking hands with people who now looked at him with genuine respect, not fear. He wasn't the quiet guy anymore. He was the conscience of the firm. He wore a new suit, one that actually fit, but he still carried his old phone, the one with the lock screen of Lily's drawing of a house with a big, bright sun. Eleanor Vance found him near the balcony, overlooking the city lights. The night air was cool and refreshing. "A different world than last year, isn't it?" she asked, a glass of sparkling water in her hand. "It is," Mark agreed. "Thank you for listening to the footnotes, Eleanor. Most people only want the highlights. You took a big risk on me." "Thank you for writing them, Mark. Most people only want to hear the music. You were the only one listening for the discord. You taught this company that a man who cares about his child is a man who can be trusted with a million lives. You taught me that ambition without ethics is just a slow-motion car crash." The message of the story was clear to everyone who worked there. Integrity has a cost, but it also has a reward that no bonus check can match. The single dad who was once considered unambitious had proven that the strongest people aren't the ones who scream for attention, but the ones who stand their ground in the silence. Lily was older now, and she understood a little more. She knew her dad was a big boss, but to her, he was still the man who never missed a recital and always knew how to fix a broken toy or a bad day. She grew up knowing that the truth matters, and that her father was living proof that you don't have to be a shark to survive in the ocean. You just have to be a lighthouse. The company continued to thrive, not by cutting corners, but by building on the foundation of the Mark standard. No one was mocked for leaving on time anymore. The ambition of the employees was now measured by their honesty and results, not their overtime hours. The corporate culture had shifted from toxic competition to sustainable collaboration. A single whisper in a cold hallway had saved a whole system. It reminded a powerful CEO of what mattered. and it gave an exhausted father the platform he deserved. It proved that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply tell the truth and go home to the people who love you. As the party continued, Mark looked at his phone. It was 9:01 p.m. He turned to Eleanor. "I have to head out. Lily is waiting for me to tell her about the party. I promised her I'd bring home one of those fancy chocolate cupcakes with the gold sprinkles." Eleanor smiled and raised her glass in a silent toast. "Go home, Mark. The company is in good hands, because they're your hands. And don't forget the cupcake. That's the most important delivery of the night." Mark walked out of the ballroom, his head held high. He didn't need the spotlight to know he had succeeded. He had the truth. He had his daughter's pride. And that was more than enough for any man. He drove home in the quiet night, a smile on his face, knowing that tomorrow would be another day of doing things the right way. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to NL Touching Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.